Hazel Anderson sat in the car, her hands clasping the hem of her blue silk dress. She sighed softly as she looked out at the lavish hotel in front of her. The shimmering lights of the chandeliers poured out from the wide windows, reflecting the splendor of the wedding party taking place inside. Beside her, Philip, her husband, turned, gently grasping his wife's hand. "We don't have to stay here long," he said, his eyes full of understanding. Hazel smiled slightly, knowing that he was considerate of her feelings, but resisted the idea of leaving so soon. After all, this was just a wedding, a social event. There was no reason for her to feel nervous or embarrassed. They entered the main hall, where soft music was playing, and well-dressed guests were raising their glasses to toast each other. Hazel didn't really know the bride or groom, but they were friends of Philip's, and he had been invited. As a talented doctor, Philip had many connections in the medical community, which meant Hazel was a regular at these events. She was used to the stares that followed them as they entered the room, not because she was a prominent figure, but because Philip, with his tall, elegant demeanor and brilliant career, was always a source of attention wherever he went. Hazel told herself that the evening would be uneventful. She would attend the party with Philip, listen to the congratulatory speeches, sip some wine, and then head home early to cuddle R before he fell asleep. But life rarely followed such simple scripts. As they walked past the bar area, a group of women standing nearby began whispering to each other, their eyes on Hazel. At first, she paid it no attention. Gossip at social events like this was not uncommon. But then a voice rang out, loud enough for her to hear clearly. "I can't believe she's here." Hazel paused for a moment but quickly regained her composure. She didn't know these women, so why were they reacting so strangely? She glanced at Philip, but he didn't seem to notice the tension simmering in the air. "She's shameless," another voice said, this time sharper. Hazel swallowed, feeling sick to her stomach. She decided to walk on, ignoring the whispers, but then one of the women suddenly blocked her path. "Hazel!" The name rang through the air, carrying a terrifying familiarity. Hazel turned her head, facing a young woman with long, wavy hair and dark brown eyes. She gave a half-smile, mixed with contempt. "Don't you recognize me?" Hazel frowned, trying to recall. She couldn't remember where she had seen the woman before, but there was something familiar about her voice and eyes. The woman laughed, a cold, sarcastic laugh. "Let me jog your memory. I'm Julia." The name rang in Hazel's head like a loud bell, awakening memories she had tried to bury for years. Julia, the family darling, her own sister. But why was Julia here? And why was she looking at her like that? A cold feeling crept up Hazel's spine as she realized that Julia had not come alone. Beside her, a middle-aged woman stood, her cold eyes scanning Hazel from head to toe. "Unbelievable," the woman, Hazel's mother, said. "You still dare to show up in places like this?" Hazel felt like her world was spinning. She hadn't seen her mother or sister in years. Ever since they kicked her out of the house, she had never thought of going back or looking for them. She had built a new life, with her own family, a life where she was no longer looked down upon, no longer exploited, no longer considered worthless. But now, they were standing before her, and their eyes were the same as ever, cold, contemptuous, as if she were nothing more than trash that didn't deserve to exist. Philip noticed the change in his wife's face, and he gently placed his hand on her back in a protective gesture. "Hazel, who are they?" Hazel swallowed, trying to keep her composure. She looked straight at Julia and her mother, for the first time in years, and spoke, calm but distant. "I don't think we have anything to say to each other." But Julia laughed dryly. "Oh, but I think we do. Did you think you could run away forever, Hazel?" Hazel's heart pounded in her chest. She knew this evening would be more than just a social event. Old wounds had been reopened, and the past she had tried so hard to bury was coming back, threatening to tear apart the life she had built. Hazel stood on the edge of the wedding garden, trying not to draw attention. But no matter how she tried, she couldn't escape the scrutiny of a group of women in the corner. They whispered to each other and whispered nasty things before one of them sneered and stepped toward Hazel. "Isn't that Hazel? Look at her, showing her face here again." A cold female voice rang out, followed by malicious giggles. Hazel felt her back stiffen. She didn't look at them, just stared at the glass in her hand, but the words aimed at her kept ringing out. "You think you can pretend you don't know anyone? After all these years of being missing, you just show up like a ghost." Hazel remained silent, but then a woman stepped forward, standing opposite her. The person's face looked strangely familiar, but Hazel couldn't immediately place it. The woman's eyes were filled with anger and contempt. "Hazel," the person said, her voice bitter. "You really don't remember me. It's Julia, your sister." Hazel's heart stopped. Julia? Sister? She stared at the woman in front of her, trying to find some fragment of her memory that would confirm her words, but her memory was blank. "I don't remember," Hazel muttered, her voice so weak she could barely hear it. Julia laughed, a laugh that was not cheerful but full of spite. "Of course you don't remember. You abandoned us. You forgot us long ago." "Mother!" Julia called out. "Come and see who's here." Another woman slowly walked over. She was older than Julia, thin, with a stern face but eyes full of reproach. When her eyes stopped on Hazel, a storm swept through her. That face, she had seen it before, but why did all the memories become so hazy? "Hazel ... the woman said, her voice trembling. "You really don't remember me?" A sudden sharp pain shot through Hazel's mind. Blurry images flashed through her. An old house, a gentle voice singing a lullaby, someone's hand stroking her hair. She shook her head, as if trying to push away the memories that were rushing back. I don't know." Hazel took a step back, feeling her breathing become heavy. "I don't remember anything." Julia crossed her arms, her eyes filled with hatred. "Do you know how many years we've been looking for you? Mother cried her eyes out for you. But what about you? You disappeared, as if we never existed, and now you dare come back and pretend nothing happened." Julia's accusations stabbed Hazel like sharp knives. She didn't know how to respond, because she didn't understand herself. Why didn't she remember them? Why did she leave them? Was it because she chose to forget everything? "I don't know how I forgot," Hazel said, her voice choking. "But I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I didn't come here to cause trouble. If my presence makes people uncomfortable, I'll leave." Julia stared at her, her eyes blazing with anger. "You have no right to be here. This is our brother's wedding, and you are no longer part of this family." Hazel felt a sharp pain in her heart. She had a family she couldn't remember now. But no matter how hard she tried, the memories were just out of reach. Had she ever really belonged here? Or would she forever be a lost soul among the people she was supposed to love? "I understand," Hazel said softly, her eyes shining with resignation. "I'll go now." She turned away, each step heavy as if dragging her into an invisible abyss. Around her, the music continued to play. The laughter of the guests continued, as if no heartbreaking reunion had just happened. But inside Hazel, a dull ache began to rise, along with an unanswered question. Who was she? And what had she lost? Hazel had never truly felt loved by her family. Ever since she was a child, she had noticed a clear difference in the way she and her younger sister Julia were treated. Julia, with her beautiful appearance and sweet personality, had always been the center of attention. Hazel, with her ordinary appearance, quiet and unremarkable, seemed to be just a pale shadow in a house where she should have been loved. Hazel's family had a tradition of doctors. Her parents were both people of status and always wanted their children to follow the path they had chosen. But from the beginning, they only placed their hopes on Julia. The best resources, expensive supplementary courses, all the spiritual and material support were poured into their little sister. Hazel, on the contrary, received nothing but criticism and indifference. When she expressed her intention to study medicine, her mother coldly replied, "You are not smart enough to be a doctor. Don't waste your time." Those words not only hurt Hazel, but also engraved in her mind the feeling of being looked down upon and rejected by her own family. Despite being constantly compared to her sister, Hazel still tried to study hard, in the hope that if she proved her ability, her parents would change their views on her. But that never happened. Upon graduating from high school, while Julia was sent to a prestigious university with all expenses paid, Hazel was forced to get a job immediately. "We don't have the money to support a useless child," her father said matter-of-factly. No one asked her what she wanted. No one cared about her dreams. Forced into a life of struggle at a young age, Hazel had to do all sorts of jobs to support herself. But the pressure didn't stop there. After every tiring hour of work, she still had to go home, where her parents didn't consider her a member of the family, but just an unpaid maid. She had to do all the housework, from cooking, cleaning, laundry, to taking care of Julia. No matter how much she did, it was never enough. Whenever she made a mistake, even the smallest thing, she would be scolded or even beaten. Her mother did not hesitate to call her useless, while her father would not even look at her. Julia, despite being loved dearly, still looked down on her, always reminding her, "You are nothing but trash." That life lasted until one day, when Julia was about to take an important exam. The little sister asked for absolute quiet to study, and Hazel, as usual, was the one who was sacrificed. Her mother bluntly told her to leave the house so as not to disturb Julia. Hazel could not believe her ears. She had worked hard, endured so much bitterness, and yet when she was no longer of any use, they threw her out without hesitation. Left with no other choice, Hazel packed up her few belongings and left the house she once called home. The first days of living alone were extremely difficult. No one helped her, no one cared about her. She had to manage every penny, find cheap places to sleep, do any job she could to survive. But instead of giving up, Hazel used her anger and pain as motivation. She worked tirelessly, earning a living while saving every penny to invest in her own future. She learned how to manage money, learned about investment opportunities, and constantly strived to rise up. No matter what, she swore to herself that she would never return to that house, where she had never truly been considered a part of the family. As the years passed, Hazel gradually changed her life. She became stronger, more independent, and more successful than ever. But no matter how hard she tried to move on from the past, painful memories still haunted her. No matter how rich or strong she could not forget the days when her family abandoned her, looked down on her, and trampled on her. Every time she saw Julia, she remembered the harsh words, the beatings, the way her sister was pampered and she was neglected. Hazel had no intention of revenge, nor did she seek recognition from those who had abandoned her, but she knew that whether she forgave her or not, the pain of the past would always be a part of her. The only thing she could do was to keep moving forward, using her own success to prove that she wasn't a piece of trash, that she didn't need a toxic family to shine. Julia crossed her arms over her chest, her eyes cold and full of contempt as she looked at Hazel. "You're useless. Nothing has changed. You're still the same as you were before. Don't think that wearing a beautiful dress can hide your low nature." Those words echoed through the splendid wedding hall, where the guests stopped, curiously watching the tense confrontation. Hazel still stood straight, but her hands clenched slightly. Painful memories of the past flooded back, but this time she was no longer the weak girl she once was. Philip stood next to her, his eyes coldly looking at Julia, then turned to Hazel. "Do you really consider them family?" His voice was soft but clear, carrying absolute support. Hazel took a deep breath, looked at Julia, then at the woman who claimed to be her mother. She said nothing, but her eyes were cold, without a trace of regret or love. Finally, Hazel spoke, her words firm and steely. "Family. The people who starved me just because I wasn't as pretty as my sister. The people who beat me and berated me, just because I wasn't as good as they wanted me to be. The people who took all my money and belongings and kicked me out of the house when Julia needed a quiet room to study for her exams. If that's what family is, I'd rather not have one. Julia smirked, but the confusion that flashed in her eyes couldn't be hidden. Hazel's words were not only true, but also a stain that no one wanted to recall. Some of the guests began to whisper, whispering to each other, their eyes looking at Julia and her mother with suspicion. Hazel continued, her voice no longer trembling as before. I used to think that if I tried hard enough, if I worked hard enough, maybe one day my mother and sister would accept me. But I was wrong. I was never the daughter my mother wanted, nor the sister Julia would accept. I have not been a member of this family for a long time, and today I officially declare it. I no longer have any relationship with you. A silence fell over the room. Hazel's mother opened her mouth as if to say something, but then closed it again, her eyes filled with anger but unable to refute. Julia turned pale, her eyes filled with hatred but unable to deny what Hazel had just said. Philip smiled, gently taking Hazel's hand. Let's go, you don't need to be here anymore. Hazel nodded, turning away without looking back. She had nothing left to hold on to or regret. She had built her own life, a life no longer bound by the traumas of the past. Today, she had not only freed herself from those who had tormented her, but also proved to them that she had grown up stronger than ever. The surrounding guests watched Hazel, their eyes filled with admiration and surprise. Some nodded slightly, as if they had just witnessed a victory that did not need applause. Julia stood there, her lips pressed together, her eyes blazing with anger but unable to do anything more. Her mother turned away, avoiding the eyes of those around her. As Hazel and Philip walked out of the banquet hall, she felt an unprecedented sense of relief. For the first time in her life, she was truly free. Hazel's story was a testament to maturity and independence. Despite being abandoned by her family, she rose up on her own, not only to survive, but also to build a better life. She doesn't need recognition from those who trampled on her, because her own success and happiness are the answers. Besides, this story also emphasizes an important truth. Family is not just about blood, but also about those who truly love and care for us. Philip, the man who is always by Hazel's side, supporting her, is the clearest proof of that. He is not a blood relative, but he is the one who brings her the safety, love, and respect that her old family never gave her. Ultimately, Hazel's story is about justice and reversal. The people who once looked down on her, used her, and exploited her, finally had to watch her rise without needing them. They once thought Hazel would never succeed, would always be a shadow beside Julia. But now, she has proven otherwise. And most importantly, she doesn't need their recognition to know her own worth. When Hazel left, she left not just a wedding party, but also the years of suffering that had imprisoned her. She wrote a new chapter of her life, one in which she was the main character, no longer bound by the wounds of the past.